Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer praised incoming House Democratic leadership in remarks on the Senate floor Wednesday. The New York Democrat first commended Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who announced earlier this month she was not seeking re-election for House leadership. Schumer said, quote, "We'll never see someone like Speaker Pelosi ever again in our lifetime." House Democrats elected Representative Hakeem Jeffries as their next leader on Wednesday. The New York Democrat will be the first black person to hold a leadership position in Congress. Schumer describes Jeffries as a leader who, quote, "will both hold the line on our democratic values while being ready to listen and keep an open mind."
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, this morning, the House Democratic Caucus, of which we were once both members, but this morning the House Democratic Caucus will make a momentous and potentially historic decision, selecting the next generation of leaders that will propel House Democrats forward in the 118th Congress. Every time the caucus comes together to choose its leaders, it's a big deal. But today's gathering is unlike any we have seen before. For one, it signals the end of a magnificent era, as my dear friend, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, has chosen to step down from leadership. We'll never see someone like Speaker Pelosi ever again in our lifetime. But her potential successor will be history-making in its own right. After today's vote, it's largely expected the new House Democratic leader will be my friend and fellow Brooklynite, Hakeem Jeffries. Hakeem Jeffries' elevation as House Democratic leader is a turning point in the history of the United States. Is a turning point in the history of the United States. Let me say that again. Hakeem Jeffries' elevation as House Democratic leader is a turning point in the history of the United States Congress. Never before has an African-American leader or any leader of color held the top position for either party in either chamber. With yesterday's vote on respect for marriage and today's vote for House Democratic leader, our representative democracy continues to march forward towards its promise of equality and full representation for all Americans. Now, I've known Hakeem Jeffries for a long time, since before the days he was first elected to the New York State Assembly in 2006. When I first met him, I thought the same thing I thought when I first met Speaker Pelosi. Here's someone who has it all. We've taken similar roads in our lifetimes. We both grew up in Brooklyn, where I was the son of an exterminator. He was the son of a social worker. We both went to New York City public schools and both served in the New York State Assembly before coming to Congress. It's not surprising that House Democrats are turning to someone from Brooklyn to lead the way next year, because when you're from Brooklyn, you learn quickly traits like persistence and serious mettle. It's a crowded place and a diverse place. You learn how to work with all kinds of different people. You learn how to stand your ground. You learn to not take things personally. Hakeem Jeffries exemplifies all these traits. He is someone who I know will both hold the line on our democratic values while being ready to listen and keep an open mind. I know he can work with the other side whenever it's necessary. Most importantly, he is dedicated to making our country a better, more prosperous place for all people from all walks of life. So today's a very good day for the House, for the House of Representatives, for our party and our country. I congratulate my friend Hakeem on his historic election as House Democratic leader. And I can't wait to talk to my neighbor from Brooklyn 4 or 6 times a day, like I did with Speaker Pelosi. Now, on respect for marriage. Yesterday, our work of making America a more perfect place took a momentous step forward as the Senate passed the Bipartisan Respect for Marriage Act. When the vote closed, the feeling on the floor was jubilation and relief, not just for ourselves and our families, but for the millions of Americans across the country whose rights will be better protected under this bill. The Respect for Marriage Act now goes to the House of Representatives for what I hope is a quick vote, and then it's on to the President's desk. And let's remember, Joe Biden was one of the early proponents of marriage equality, even when it got some others not so happy with him. Passing the Respect for Marriage Act would not have happened without the leadership in this Senate of so many of my colleagues, Senators Baldwin and Sinema and Feinstein, who originally authored this landmark bill, and my Republican colleagues, Collins, Portman, Tillis. I thank them all. The entire process was also a vindication of a central premise Senate Democrats and I have embraced this Congress. I've always said I have a hierarchy. First, try to get things done in a bipartisan way whenever possible. It's far better to find a way to pass legislation that will help Americans than to hold show votes that have no hope of becoming law. And that proved true on marriage equality. My number one priority in the end is to find ways to get bills passed in the Senate. So I hope that yesterday's vote is a signal that both parties can keep working together on difficult issues in the next Congress. If our Republican colleagues can shake off the MAGA wing of their party that is holding Republicans down, we can get a lot done. And it's obvious to everyone, there are many Republican senators who don't embrace MAGA. And we say to them, we want to keep working with you. It's necessary in order to keep tackling the big problems that face our country. And if Republicans don't follow the MAGA path in the next Congress, it will go a long way to restoring people's faith that Congress can work together and even disagree without being disagreeable. And we don't need to wait for the new year to continue working together. In about 16 days or so, government funding is going to run out unless Congress acts to prevent a shutdown. Yesterday, I sat down with the President, with Speaker Pelosi, with Leader McConnell, with Leader McCarthy, to discuss how we can ensure that a shutdown is avoided and that government is properly funded. For the most part, I was heartened and encouraged by the conversation. Speaking with Leader McConnell, we both believe that we must do everything possible to pass a year-long funding package. And we both prefer an omnibus, though we have different views of what should be in it. And we do need to come together on those. But both Leader McConnell and I have said that an omnibus is the best way for supporting our troops, supporting our allies in Ukraine, and keeping Americans safe at home and abroad. A CR, meanwhile, is horrible news for our troops in uniform, because it will throw their families into great uncertainty and severely hinder their ability to keep America safe. It will also allow some of the countries that are not our allies, but adversaries in many ways, to gain the leg up in so many different new technologies. Do we really want to give the Chinese Communist Party the chance to outcompete and outmaneuver us in the Indo-Pacific? Do we want our troops to protect us with one hide tied behind their back while our adversaries are operating at full capacity? Of course not. But that's the danger we face if we don't pass an omnibus. Everyone's going to have to give something if we want to successfully fund the government for a full year. And while I'm encouraged by the goodwill so far, we have a lot of difficult work to do before both parties reach a final agreement. So, just as both parties cooperated to pass the Respect for Marriage Act yesterday here in the Senate, and just as we've cooperated on CHIPS, gun safety, veterans benefits, and so much more over the last 6 months, let's finish this session by passing an omnibus on a bipartisan basis. Finally, Mr. President, on judges. Later today, the Senate will vote to confirm 2 highly qualified and talented public servants to serve as lifetime appointments to the federal bench. Camille Velez-Reeve to serve as district judge for Puerto Rico, and Ann Nardacci to serve as district judge for the Northern District of New York. An Albany native and one of the first women who would sit on the bench, Ann Nardacci represents upstate New York perfectly. She's the kind of bread and butter candidate that upstate New Yorkers like. And she's built a career on taking on special interests. So people in the Northern District of New York will not have to worry that she won't represent them when others come before the court who are special and powerful but don't have the right arguments. For the last 2 years, one of my top priorities has been making sure we restore a sense of balance, impartiality, and experience to the federal bench. And now that Democrats will keep our majority in the next Congress, that will continue unabated. We've made historic progress so far in the last 2 years. We've confirmed 85 judges. to the federal bench, the best pace since the Clinton administration. And those 85 judges comprise perhaps the most diverse collection of new jurists we have ever seen. 75% of these new judges are women. I'm so proud of that. 2/3 are people of color. I'm so proud of that. And many of them come from professional backgrounds we rarely see in judicial nominees. I'm proud of that as well. But we're not yet done. We're going to hit the ground running when the new year begins, and our democracy will unquestionably be better off for it. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms.